I was recently talking to myself about writing things in a notebook as opposed to in my computer, and lo and behold, I took pages of notes in my notebook, and now I feel like I wish they were in my computer so they were in one spot, because I don't really know if I want to go into all of them right now. Because I'm seeing a few things, and I'm not sure if they're true, but I'm seeing that hitting the ceiling, or really getting to the edge of beyond one's previous perceptions, really pushing the boundaries of what has been perceptible to this particular individual, can cause one to really bottom out. And it's happened to me numerous times before, and the bottoming out is usually some kind of crisis and that energetic, scary feeling in my heart. So yesterday I was tired, I took a nap, and today I was tired too, and I was trying to nap, and I was laying down, and my brain was sort of active still, but I was partly asleep, and my brain really saw that we are the world, or as Krishnamurti says, I am the world and the world is me. And my body got just a tiny bit freaked out, like what do I do with that? What do I do with seeing that? Because the brain is used to operating based on I am the ego and the ego is me. So there's a little bit of fear, because how does one operate in this world based on one mode of operation and then start to see this other mode, and that mode gets warped into something that is not really what it is. And I've had a lot of insights into that today, and I don't know if I really want to go into them. I've also had an insight into how this is sort of like seasickness, but instead of S-E-A, S-E-E. Not that it's a sickness, I just thought using the word seasickness is kind of funny, because one is almost made ill by how much one can see. And I'm not talking about ill in terms of mental illness, but it's just difficult to know how to navigate when one feels like they see a lot more than what we're conditioned to see. So in saying that, I feel like I've been talking about embodying versus just having dialogue, which is sort of more of a mental activity, and going from seeing to being. So a lot of my energy going through my brain is diverted to perception and actually seeing into things and seeing more and unfolding things and then talking about it. And I've sort of made myself not one-dimensional, but that is the main way that this other energy is being utilized to perceive. But if I could see that maybe I've seen enough, and I think that's what happens sometimes when I hit the ceiling, is I've seen enough, and the brain sort of reacts by retracting back down to quite a low level of consciousness, which happens in a way because what one sees when one sees too much can be scary. It can really show the brain how all of this works, and when it sees that, it's almost like it has to go back to the beginning. It's like game over, start again. Because when one sees that, one really has to just forget it. And I think that's what I'm seeing, is just forget what I just saw and move on, not necessarily go deeper into it and extrapolate what that means based on what I feel I just saw. And I don't know if that makes any sense. And I made some notes about it, but I'm just trying to talk longer instead of always looking at my notes. So I might type my notes into the computer and then talk about some of them, and again, keep telling myself to start moving some of this energy towards being. So I just spent like an hour singing some songs, and that is a way to just utilize some time, a whole hour, to just sing, which would actually prevent these other perceptions, because the mind and body and being is being used for that, So I actually feel like moving this energy towards being, like singing and things that are really embodied. And I've talked about this forever, but I'm really seeing why this might be necessary, because otherwise that energy is always going to be seeing more and more. But if I can move into being, like singing or dancing or these embodied things, then that dimension won't be as active, because the energy is always there. So the energy is there if I'm singing, or if I'm pretending I know how to dance. But by using that energy to sort of pretend I know how to dance or sing, maybe I'll actually get better at those things. And it's not like I have to or anything. I'm just seeing that the seeing is so infinite, and it could just go on forever. This brain could just keep going on seeing things and making metaphors and extrapolations and things forever. And it's not as fun if other people don't see it too. So one can go into one's own perceptual reality tunnel of seeing more and more, but that actually gets one further away from the world that we all see together, or seemingly see all together. And so yeah, I feel like now in talking to myself, some of the context I created for myself will actually come together as something that creates an understanding for myself to do whatever the next thing is, because I'm seeing that if I keep talking to myself like this, it'll just keep going. And I don't necessarily want to be sitting, which is actually the leading cause of death, and just talking to myself, which is not necessarily the only way I would like to use my voice. Maybe I can sing, and that was my dream as a child, and I can't at the moment. I realize that. But I didn't necessarily think when I started talking to myself that I could talk to myself for an entire year and get deeper and deeper into things and see more and more and say more and more and say a lot of new things to myself. But that's what happened just by unfolding that. So I'm wondering if the same can happen with something else that actually turns off perception for a while. Because, like I said, it hits the ceiling and then I bottom out. And I feel actually today like I could bottom out, and I need to prevent that to some degree. And I feel like the hearty nutritionals will definitely help. I took an extra vitamin C, so I'll probably take 4 today. I took hawthorn for my heart. So, yeah, and I really saw this mechanism of how people get warped into mental patients, and it was just like, ooh. So, feeling like embodying is important too, because otherwise if I'm all in this dialogue and perception and I go home and I'm just trying to share perceptions and wanting to get into that, then that could be perceived as intense. Whereas if I move into fun and embodying fun things in the next month, if I can just go back and have fun, that's what I want to do, go back and have fun with my family and friends. Not be all in my head and trying to make dialogue and things. There are things that I would like to create, and today I was thinking, oh, I'll just like get planning what I want to create, but then it's like going back with this motive of wanting to put things on people or like get people to help me or something, and I don't know if that's the right orientation to go back with. Just go back celebrating being back and see what happens. So I really don't know. And I feel like too, when I hit the ceiling, it's time to rest. So interestingly enough, I've been tired and wanting to nap, and that's sort of a sign. Rest. And I actually feel like one of the things that's good about the psych ward is one is just resting in the same place, not doing much, not participating in the world, and actually letting the world catch up a little bit, because the world's still out there turning and spinning and doing everything that it does, yet one is sort of sitting and not moving. So I think there is this period of unfolding and this period of not moving, which could be more like not moving the mind, not perceiving, or also not moving, but just resting the body too. So when I feel like I'm getting to that point where it could almost be a crisis without feeling like a crisis because I'm on the Hearty Nutritionals. It's good to just rest and be more still and be more in my body. So I'm just seeing that this could be a sign. So there's something about keeping oneself away from the psych ward, but then there's also acknowledging that there's certain things that happen there that could be good, like just resting, which doesn't require a psych ward, but it does require one to see that one needs to rest, even if one doesn't feel like one needs to. But there could be signs that I need to rest, even if I'm not necessarily tired, though I have actually been tired. So I see what I'm saying there. Resting more, hopefully, not just resting, but getting into things that will block some of these perceptions and create neurology for other things besides just talking to myself. And I also wonder if it's time to break the relationship with the self that I think that I am. I've created this dialogue self version of me, always talking and perceiving, but maybe it's time to let that go and start fresh. So I'm wondering about that. And today I've seen a lot about relationship and how we really exist in relationship, and I don't think I'll go into that now, but I'll type it up or maybe I'll make another video about it. We'll see. So the seasickness is a seeing that makes one walk on shaky ground. It's not just the ground of the material world, but there's this other ground that one can be in contact with. Not just our feet in contact with the physical ground, but our brain is in contact with this metaphysical or quantum order of some kind. But at the same time, one needs to keep one's feet on the ground too. And a friend told me a saying, before enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. After enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. So keeping in contact with the body is very important. And I actually had an experience yesterday when I was drying my hair. I kind of flip my hair upside down and dry the roots quickly so it doesn't dry really flat to my head, because I could let it air dry here because I'm in California. But there's a lot of mornings when it's actually cold, so I just dry the roots and the rest dries really quick. But anyways, I was looking at the ground and all of a sudden I felt like I wasn't centered in my head, and there was this hair on the floor of the bathroom and it got all blurry and kind of like hologram looking, and I was just like, whoa. It was just kind of jarring in a way. But maybe those are things that I'll need to get used to, just like that perception my brain had when I was having a nap today. And just drop it. I talked to myself about just drop it and move on. And the seasickness is from the motion and the movement of the moment of relationship. So when the ego sort of is scrambled or not so firmly in place, one is actually moved more by this movement of relationship, which is the space between us. It's not this pre-calculation going on to move us, but we're actually moving, taking in consideration the other without actually thinking I'm considering the other. So it feels a little disorienting because we're moving, but there's other factors that are moving us besides just what our programs and the stories in our head are telling us to do. So it's the movement of relationship to the moment and to others, and not the movement of the ego. And I talked to Hearty Nutritionals today, and they suggested that I taper off the Benadryl because I've been kind of tired these last 2 days. So they suggested cutting it down by 1/4 every 4 days. So I'll do 4 days of 3/4 of Benadryl and 4 days of half, 4 days of 1/4, and then I will be off as long as I can still fall asleep okay. Because that's what happens as the nutrition takes over. The medications sort of aren't doing their thing because the nutrition is doing it first, so that's sort of left circulating in the body and maybe causing more drowsiness and things. So I will do that, and that's kind of exciting that by the time I go home I might be off of everything. And it feels a little scary too, but then I remember, okay, I have these nutrients and they seem to be toning everything down. Like that perception when I was trying to sleep was kind of freaky, but it didn't really freak me out. It sort of was scary in theory, just like hearing that there's a black widow spider somewhere where I often go is like, oh, that's scary, but not actually being terrified physically. And the lady that does the ozone therapy emailed me back, and she said she actually has a bit of a bipolar disorder and uses the oxygen ozone machine in her ears with a stethoscope, and it helps. And I'm not going to try that this time, but it was interesting to learn. So I feel like I need to change my relationship with myself from this personal seeing and dialogue, which isn't really personal because I'm recording it for one, and for two, I feel like when a brain sees in this way, it still subtly affects the whole, and Krishnamurti has talked about that too. If one is perceiving an ego consciousness and moving about the day in that, one is actually contributing in an additive way to the collective ego consciousness. But if one is seeing a different way, then one is adding to that form of seeing in the collective. It's not personal. It adds to the relationship. It changes in our relationships. So it's not a bad thing, but I feel like I want to go from that to just being more playful and celebrating, because that's a lot more fun. And can I build a new... So I want to say to the universe, hey universe, I don't just want this body to be a vehicle of sitting here and talking to myself. I don't want this body to just be sitting here, and I don't want this voice to just be talking to myself. And I say just, I'm doing other things, of course. I'm living my life too, but this energy is creating this dialogue with myself, and can some of that creative energy create a different creation? And so I invite the universe to move into that, and I invited that rapper voice, and I don't know if I like that, so now I'm inviting this singing thing, and it's sort of meaningless. It doesn't mean anything, and I spend a lot of my time making meaning, and meaning is so infinite that could go on forever, whereas singing, the meaning is just to sing and enjoy it, not to try to make meaning beyond the activity itself. So singing and dancing, please, universe. And I feel like the trouble is I'm seeing more and more without being more and more. And this is still changing my being, but it's gone to a point where I'm so embodied as this person who has perceptions and talks about them with myself that I would like to explore other dimensions. And I actually signed up for a 1-hour webinar by Ken Wilber on Sunday, and I haven't followed any of his work for eons, but we'll see what he has to say. It's something about superhumanness, and I'm interested in that, of course, because seeing more and more will just likely short-circuit my brain, whereas singing, I don't feel, will do that. And I feel like this self-dialogue has removed a lot of my blindness, but I also feel like this blindness must move to kindness. So if I'm just seeing in order to see, but not see in order to be kind. So I remember asking the question before, in order to what? So I used to do a lot of healthy things and get more healthy and more healthy and more healthy and more healthy. And then I realized, more healthy in order to what? For what? Just to be more healthy? Of course I could keep being more healthy and more healthy, but for what? And that's when I started putting my energies into something else. And now I haven't really been being healthy, but I'm seeing more and talking more. But seeing more and talking more in order to what? And maybe there is no what. And that's the thing with singing. Singing is just in order to sing, and maybe talking is just in order to talk, but I've talked a lot, and I'd like to use that energy for something else, and I'm pretty sure I've said that in a million ways, but I'm really trying to convince myself and the universe to open up other dimensions. And actually, when I was in my first experience of map consciousness, all dimensions were open, or a lot of them, and there was singing, and there was dancing, and there was rollerblading in crazy creative ways. So I need to be more choiceless, more non-directional, because right now I'm in this direction of talking to myself. So I want to turn seeing into kindness, otherwise my heart will eventually get heavy with everything that I see. So can that seeing be translated into some kind of kind action? And then I'm back at the altruism again in a different way. Compassionate action. And I remember once hearing Dion Vimal saying, "I insist you do meaningless things." And it was part of a talk, but that line stuck out to me. Yet here I've been making all this meaning. And at the same time I've said this meaning is meaningless. As soon as I make a meaning, it is meaningless. So I just want to go into other meanings, like different expressions of the body. And not because I feel I have to express, like I actually want to sing or anything. It's just, there's this energy and it's going to do something. And it seems like it just wants to talk. And we'll see if it wants to do something else. And maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just wants to talk. But I will at least move my body to see, to investigate, or to stop seeing at least and sing or something. I need to also stay limited. And Krishnamurti also says you must give your life to understand your life. And I feel like that's what this self-dialogue has been for sure. So maybe I'll need to keep going with this. Maybe I do need to talk about everything I see. We'll see. Things grounded in reality. I went to the store and I bought some floss because I was out. And I also bought some soap because I'm running low. And I bought some water because I've been drinking reverse osmosis water mainly. And it just feels so dead and I'm feeling dehydrated in this 33 to 37 degree heat wave right now. So I got some pH 8.8 water that also has minerals and electrolytes in it, and then just another thing of glacier spring water, just to see if getting some better hydration will help. And I also bought some krill oil because I don't think I'm getting enough omega-3s, and I'm also feeling like my brain could maybe just use that support with some of the subtle things I've experienced, which are really subtle, but they're also related to this memory and ecphoric sensation thing and being non-linear. And I was thinking, there's often talk about non-linear. Well, what's non-linear? Perhaps it's quantum. So instead of saying non-something, I'll just try and say quantum. So it might help with this quantum aspect of the brain, and just having that EPA and DHA could be good. So I just got a small bottle of krill oil. I think it only lasts like 2 weeks. So I might just try to see if it helps a little bit, just to give my brain a boost. So I'm taking quite a few supplements right now, but maybe it's also a gesture towards my body that I would like to take care of it. I think there is an epigesturetic effect, which could be similar to placebo effect, which is just kind gestures towards the body. Doesn't matter what it is, it's symbolic of actually wanting to take care of the body and live longer and support the brain, etc. And one other thing I'll share, because I really just want to make one video today, is that yesterday I wrote down that now that I'm off meds, it makes having a baby possible, because I never imagined myself ever wanting to carry a child with medication in my system. Of course, doctors will say some meds are safe, but I still just wouldn't want to. If I'm on medication, I just don't feel that I'm going to have a baby. And everyone's different. People can make their own decisions. And so now that I'm off meds, it opens up that possibility. Even though right now I don't feel like I would like one. But now I feel like maybe after a couple of years of being off meds, maybe I would want one. And maybe then my body would be in the condition to maybe carry a child as I would want. So, don't want to have one at this point, but now it actually opens that possibility. Because if I all of a sudden wanted to, but I was taking medications, I probably... So here's my krill oil. And the interesting thing is, I flipped back to the beginning of the notes I wrote in my notebook, and I saw a baby is possible. And then after that, starting yesterday, I wrote all of this, which I may or may not type out. I may just work through it slowly and then try and type notes, because I don't want notes in books and all over the place in my computer. So we'll see what happens. I'm not going to do that tonight, but I did write that down. And then the interesting thing about that is, you know, when you watch a YouTube video, there are videos in the side that, what do you want to watch next? And mine are usually Krishnamurti or some kind of music that I was listening to. But then this one said, is it ever the right time to have a baby? And I've never seen anything like that in the sidebar of my YouTube. And I was just looking at the question again today, and then I looked at my YouTube and it was there when I was watching a video. And I was like, what the heck? I swear technology responds to our brains now. It's really integrated, and I've already had experiences like that too with different things that have happened with technology. It's not a separate thing. It's part of consciousness, and technology could have some kind of consciousness. And I talked about the algorithm that makes things pop up in the computer that we might want to buy based online now, even if we're not. Because it's all in the airwaves, it's everywhere. So how do we know that technology can't eventually pick up on things, and just me thinking something or looking at something will make it pop up on YouTube? And maybe that technology already exists and they just really haven't said anything. I don't know, but technology responds to consciousness for sure. And technology is just communication, and we communicate with each other through technology. And it's, yeah, I haven't figured that out, but I just thought it was interesting. So I will include the little sidebar snippet to show that it was there. And to me, that was just weird. It's like, think about something or ask a question, or even saying, oh, I haven't been writing and I don't speak as fluidly, and maybe it's because I'm not writing. And then the next day, all I do is write, and I haven't written anything in probably a month. So I feel like when one's brain is in that state of possibilities, whatever one says will show up, whether it's through one's own action in one's handwriting, all one thing, and technology is part of life. And so yeah, I just feel that, yeah, I've had that experience before where technology responds in freaky ways, and it's kind of freaky, but yeah, technology just might be part of the fabric of reality, and we kind of figure out how to utilize it, but maybe it's always been there. Maybe even there's a technology within us, and yeah, I don't want to get into that. That's something that I haven't really gone into too much, but to me it's sort of a clue of how when one is in the state of possibilities, there's many possibilities for things to show up, not just a person and living things, but perhaps even technology. My old man's got a problem. Oh, I didn't know it was still recording, but it is. So I will show you this pretty bouquet that I made. This is magic right here. What's your problem? Oh, my mustache smells good. The love tuner. And perhaps I'm tuned to love. I don't know what it is. This morning I was having some insights, really seeing myself as consciousness itself and not this body. The body's part of consciousness, as opposed to feeling like consciousness is a part of the body. So it was an interesting insight. That light was too bright, so I just put some paper towel around it. And yeah, I was just sensing that and sensing, okay, well, what does that all mean? And I've been talking about how talking sort of creates these synchronistic experiences after wondering and talking about them. And yesterday there was a really powerful one that was very multi-layered. I was taking the garbage out and I walked to the garbage can and then came back and there was a flower on my door handle, and I immediately thought that that guy that hasn't really been leaving me alone was in the vicinity, and I was scared. And at the same time I had left my phone somewhere else, and then I was in my room, afraid to leave it and trying to get a hold of people to help me. And so I had to communicate by iMessage and things, and finally I got a hold of somebody. And then somebody came to help me, and then I figured, oh, actually it was probably this other person, so it's okay. But then right at that moment when my friend was going to leave because I felt okay, the person who I thought might have left it, that guy, texted me, and I was like, oh my God, don't leave. And the person who I thought maybe left the flower, their phone had died, so it was all of this stuff at the same time. And then somebody came to the door and gave me this gift of this necklace that has something to do with intensity and to allow oneself to be peeled to the very core of intensity, and how it's sort of carved in a way that isn't contrived by human design. And so it's an interesting read. I'll have to read it again. But so somebody left me a gift of a flower, and then I'm thinking it was a gift from somebody I didn't want, and then somebody else brings me a gift, and then there's a supportive friend and other friend on the phone who was helping me, and there was just so much support. Yet my brain went to worst case scenario. It's this person kind of after me in a way, and I think the brain goes to worst case scenario as a survival mechanism. It doesn't think, oh, who could this be? And it was kind of scary timing because I'd only left my room for like 5 minutes, and then it was there, so I felt that person was around. But it wasn't that person, but that person still texted around the same time. So it was just dealing with people being kind and giving me a gift, and somebody else giving me a gift and not being able to receive it fully because I'm like afraid. So it was just all this mixed stuff. And I've also been talking about how things haven't been happening just in my mind while I'm sitting at home in my apartment back home, but actually in reality. And I feel like that's happening partly because the meds are out of my system. And so the universe can respond to my actual nervous system, not my nervous system mediated by medications, which seems to build up this allostatic load because one's not really able to deal with things or face things. And that is actually a very important temporary measure for sure, to be able to slow down that process of facing things because there's too much. So one sort of slows it down, but one still has to face things in new ways. So I'm not facing old situation, but new similar situations that resonate that might actually make me feel like going into that crisis or trauma mode. But if my nervous system's strong enough to face it and deal with it in a strong way, it actually strengthens that situation and doesn't make it into something fearful. So for example, one time when I was starting to lose touch with reality and go into crisis mode, I went into a tattoo shop with a friend because they were handing out some kind of solicitation, and then the tattoo person said, hey, you want to see the back of my tattoo store, blah blah blah. And as soon as I went in there, I felt trapped. I felt, oh my God, get me out of here now. And it totally scared me. Whereas this time I felt a bit trapped because somebody wouldn't leave my room, and I said, "Get out." And I said it strong. I didn't feel as afraid. So it felt like it was healing some of those past scenarios where I wasn't able to be like, "Get me out of here." And when I wasn't able to deal with those situations before, it was telling my nervous system, "I'm not ready to deal with this." And then I went into crisis, which is sort of like having all those things one's not able to deal with at the moment in one's nervous system just play out in the psyche instead of in actual situations. And I don't know if this is true. I'm just sort of sensing it from my experience and what's happening now that I feel stronger. And I'm not saying this feeling of strength is going to last. That's not the point. It's just, again, sensing that one's level of consciousness is what creates a situation, but also creates the way one moves through that situation. And then based on the way one moves through it, it's somewhat healing. And then it's also revealing in how one might move through things in the future. So this person's been texting me and saying, "I love you, and I don't know why. Am I attached? Am I in love? I don't know. This has never happened." And I seriously have no reply, except this morning I kind of thought of saying, if you really want to go out and help the world with this energy that you feel you have access to, go and share with men that no means no, and get out now means get out now, not in 5 minutes. It means get out now. And if that simple point was understood, I feel there would be a good chance that the world would actually start changing into the beautiful and intelligent human world that it can be. And that's not the only factor, but that's a factor that has been in my life, and I feel like it's been in many, 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 way too many women's lives. And I know what that creates. It's created most of what I've been through these last 6 years or 7 years, and it's all a learning process, but it's a learning process that I would hope most women don't have to go through. So this person is creating the man-woman story out of that energy and focusing it on me and feeling like he wants to be with me or something, which is such an easy story for a man to create. I want a woman and be all intimate with her and things, and that's a story as old as human time. So when one gets access to that energy, to funnel it into that, it's just too easy. To actually diversify it and share it and turn it into something meaningful, not just biologically meaningful, it takes some work. It takes awareness. It takes learning. It takes being responsible for that energy, and it's a learning process. It's difficult to just be responsible for that energy and understand it from the beginning many times, and I probably will again. So I'm not speaking as this is how I am. I'm speaking from the level of consciousness I'm able to be in tune with now, and that's all we can really know. We're not really these static entities where you have access to all levels of consciousness and all levels of human spirit and all levels of human experience, no matter how enlightened we feel one day and how miserable we feel the next. And it can be attuned in some way over time, intelligently somehow, and that can all be wiped out in a day, and then one has to start again. It's consciousness. It's not this linear ego that we grieve when we lose and we try to add to. It's much more than that, and I'm seeing that lately. Who knows how long that perception will last, and it probably won't last very long, because there's always deeper perceptions and deeper understandings about one's being, not just the self as one carries around the body by the ego dragging it around. There's a lot more to life than that. So it made me feel like being more of a woman's advocate than a mental health advocate. Maybe part of this is moving through the consolidation of everything that's happened to a mental illness, to going back to some more of the root things. And I've done a lot, and things have been done, and that's kind of how life goes, but one can really learn. And I feel like I've become stronger in knowing myself, and that was sort of the gift of this scenario that played out, was knowing myself more, and knowing that I feel like having this zero tolerance rule for that kind of stuff anymore, because I give people the benefit of the doubt that maybe they want to be friends or share energy in some way, but that biological story seems to always be there. And he was trying to say that my story of not being attracted to men is more to do with trauma and things, and maybe there's some truth about that. I've talked about that myself, that I don't know if it was that way, but in the evolution of consciousness way, we don't need more creation and procreation between human beings. We actually need to just be more kind and loving and share energy in new ways besides just trying to make more human beings. There's way too many of us. And that's just a fact. And maybe there's not, if the consciousness was high enough to actually create things that would provide abundantly for us, instead of providing abundantly for very few and the rest of the world being in utter chaos. So I don't want to go into all that too much right now. Maybe it'll come up more later. It seems like the universe has shown me that I'm ready to be stronger and just maybe talk about more of those sorts of things with regards to how my life unfolds moving forward. And that's how I would like to see it. I even thought, oh, maybe I could teach women self-defense. Not that I've done any of that, or I don't know, maybe there'll be something that this energy gets channeled into passionately to create. And I think that's what the energy is experimenting with right now, is what direction do you really want to go? Because you could go any direction with this energy. One can use that direction to fuel one's erection, and that's really not that creative. It's so ingrained in our neurology that we need to be creative in creating more neurons for other things, really. And our whole society reinforces that. And not that there's no place for that. Sure, people are beautiful, men are beautiful, women are beautiful, blah, blah, blah. But that's not the whole picture. But we're making it the whole picture. And then when that energy comes in for people in so-called mania or map consciousness, a lot of times it just gets diverted through the channels that are already dominant. Like, some people experience hypersexuality. I haven't really experienced that too much, really, I don't think. But some people experience it a lot. But if those are the only ways that we're wired, when this incredible just destroys that wiring and we're left non-functional, needing to create new wiring that is diversified, anyone can just recover the wiring of pleasure and desire. And that's what recovery is, in a way, is recover one's personal goals and personal pleasures and personal desires and personal bank account and personal home. And then we're missing out on this other thing that we could be creating, this vision that a lot of us share, that we see, but then the energy still gets diverted into the ego me, because that's dominant wiring, and then destroys it, and then we're left with nothing except this shell of a body, and people coming up to us trying to help us in the ways that they only know to help, which aren't necessarily ultimately helpful. They can be temporarily and functionally somewhat helpful, but they're not helpful in terms of this creative vision. And I don't think the creative vision is that everybody turns into procreating machines. Evolution of consciousness is diversifying human brains. So some brains like the same gender or sex, and that's part of the diversification to make this world more complex. So if there is some kind of catastrophe, there will be some kind of human beings that survive. Because the catastrophe is really a psychological catastrophe. It's a crisis in consciousness, as Krishnamurti says. So if we don't move towards being more in this consciousness, right action will not unfold and stuff like that. Yesterday I didn't do a video. I spent a lot of time at the beach. It was so hot here where I am, 38 degrees. My favorite pink tree melted. But at the beach it was probably 20 degrees cooler. Well, 20 degrees Fahrenheit, so I don't know what that is in Celsius, but a lot cooler, and it was perfect for getting sun and not burning, just tanning. I went in the ocean and the waves were so intense, and I jumped in them and jumped under them, and they nearly took my bathing suit off a few times, and after being in the water half an hour I realized my head really hurt, so I got out. I guess that's what water in the ears feels like, or just when the waves are crashing against one. So that was really fun, and maybe I'll do a video every other day instead of every day. We'll see. I talk about these things just to myself, but I never really know how it will unfold. And I forgot to share that up to a week ago, I took off my reminder that is set through an app called Voice Secretary that pops up probably every day, and it pops up on the top of the screen and it says Voice Secretary Reminder. And if I accidentally touch it, it says, in my voice, should you take a Seroquel? And the heading says, are you afraid of showering? So if I'm afraid of showering, it could mean that I need to take a Seroquel. Most days I don't see that pop up, and I think it just is one of those reminders that if you don't really see it, it just doesn't remind you again. But I accidentally pressed it, and so it said, should you take a Seroquel? And at that moment I was like, I don't even need this anymore. So that's one of my little safety tools that I am just getting rid of. I got rid of it. I erased that. So that was something. And I'm kind of excited when I get back home to take off this medical bracelet that I mainly got just for being in the States, in case I lost touch with reality and somebody just didn't know who I was or what was going on. And the chance of that was really small, but just having this sometimes, this reassurance is enough to reduce fear. So if something was happening that might make me feel like, oh my gosh, I'm unsafe, I don't have to feel more unsafe because I can't be safe when I'm unsafe. So these things have a place and time and context. And so when I get home, I'll be taking it off. And the last 3 weeks I've been off meds and I've been sleeping less, feeling rested more, up earlier in the morning. I wake up before my alarm at like 6:30. My alarm clock is usually that I have to go pee, and then I just feel awake and I'm up. And I've also been less hungry, and I've probably lost a bit of the weight that I gained since I've been here. And I've been trying to type up my notes, but I wrote so much. I wrote this, this, this. 2 pages there, page, 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 page. And the more I flip, the less I want to type it up. But then if I start talking about it, I'll just have more to write down. So we'll see what happens. I remember when I got here, I had this big phase of downloading a lot into a notebook and some into the computer. And I liked a notebook more before because I was always doing my videos outside. But now it's actually too hot to do them outside. So I do them inside so I can have the notes on my computer to just look at the computer screen. But now I have computer screen and notebook, so it's getting a bit intense. But I also feel more calm, like I don't have to get to this right away. I'll talk about it at some point. And it's actually giving me a lot to talk about later on. And maybe I will just be slow with that and not really get to it until maybe when I go home and the weather starts getting more crappy. Because when I get home, the weather will be beautiful and I'll need to be outside as much as possible. So it'll be more about integrating into being back home, staying calm, staying in peaceful places, finding places in nature to be, being with my friends and family, and then talking about this other stuff like extrapolations when the weather starts changing, but still wanting to talk about some of them just to keep my brain in that mode of talking about them too, because right now it's writing a lot of them down, but it's not talking about them as often and as much as I was, especially recently. And now that I'm off meds, I just feel more like just being in reality and being in daily life and not feeling like I need to talk so much about this stuff. But there's a lot of new stuff coming through that is totally different. It's in the realm of the context that I want to create moving forward, that I talk to myself about, wondering if that's what would happen, and that's what's happening. So I do need to still talk about it because it's going to create that buffer of creating a new context net and web to sort of surround me with my own memes. So when I go home especially, I don't get swallowed up by the memes of the dominant paradigm. And I could just avoid it altogether, but I still want to be with some of my friends who are in the paradigm, so I'll still be exposed to it even if I'm not putting myself back into it. So we'll see how that goes. And tonight I'm going to see Wonder Woman, and I talked about going to see that. So I'm going to see it, and I'm wondering if there'll be things to extrapolate on that. And something I listened to yesterday, I think it was yesterday, yeah. It was a really awesome podcast by Ken Wilber on the Superhuman operating system. And I actually made a lot of notes on what he said as well as extrapolations, because it's totally what I'm feeling I need to move into in order to prevent the dominant paradigm from coming in and trying to dominate my consciousness. And so much of what he said is just so similar to the things that I've actually experienced, not just smiling and nodding at beautiful words and concepts and ideas, but feeling like really so-called mental illness is misunderstood superhumanity, or misunderstood getting acquainted with our actual capacities. And those capacities could be slightly different for each person, but it really is this superhuman quality, and it's a misunderstanding that people who go into that, it takes a while to understand it, and while they're in that vulnerable state, we have people coming in with their paradigm, getting us to understand it in the way that they would want to profit off of us. So I think there was a lot there in what I extrapolated. And I won't go into that at this exact moment, but I probably could sooner rather than later, because it's so important. And I actually am feeling more like organizing some of the extrapolations and not just going point by point, but reading through some and grouping them together to make it a little bit more coherent, because this next bit of context I create for myself, I feel needs to be more coherent, because this is the coherent story that I actually want to create and live in. The other one before, they were just points, and there was definitely some coherence to it, but it was just point and point and point. And that's okay, because it was sort of like making a point and then actually wanting to leave it behind. If I make a point about something about mental health, I kind of want to leave that behind and actually move into this new coherent story that I'm going to create for myself. So in that way, it would be good if it's a little bit more coherent, and maybe the brain will be on board with creating it in a more coherent way, because I feel like at some point I might just be able to speak and not speak from any kind of notes. So it'll go from more coherent notes, actually making them a bit more coherent, to just speaking one day when I've actually created enough of that context to just speak about it, and maybe speak about the journey and so many things. So anyways, yeah, I can just see that it would be good to talk about the Ken Wilber stuff, and then a lot of the different extrapolations I've had, put them into different themes and unfold them a little more coherently moving forward, possibly. I say that now, but things change day to day. And yesterday I was at the beach and it was so beautiful and perfect temperature, and I'd never been to that beach before until recently, and it's sort of my new favorite spot. And it was really busy, and I was driving in the parking lot with my friend, and I pretty much felt like I'd have to turn around and loop and go out of the parking lot, which would take a while even to just get out of the parking lot to find street parking. And then I said, I wonder if there's electric vehicle parking. And then 2 seconds later, I looked to my left, there's an empty electric vehicle parking spot. So I parked, I plugged in, I got parking close to the beach as opposed to far away, and I've never paid for a charge up of that thing, but it cost $1.19 for like 3 hours of charge. So that was awesome. And I've talked before about nutrient dependency and different people who talk about that, like Andrew Saul, and he has a really good video on YouTube about that. And just being on these micronutrients for a number of months, and now only on micronutrients for the last 3 weeks, I feel like it could be that I'm not mentally ill, I'm just nutrient dependent. And it makes sense that the body would need more nutrients to process the past and nutrients to deal with the present moment at the same time. And also the brain seems to be more powerful when it's initiated into this superhumanity and getting acquainted with one's gifts that are trying to manifest and basically come online. And I remember watching a really great documentary called Masks of Madness by Dr. Abram Hoffer, and I remember he said 80% of mental illnesses are nutritional problems, not mental problems. And so I wonder if at some point I'll become more acquainted with that. I was studying that a lot, and I never really gave a chance to the micronutrient products. I was doing different things like pyrrole disorder testing and different things, and that didn't really help. It's the micronutrients that help the most for me, just doing that protocol. So far, so good. And so I'm really curious about that. Maybe I'll be more interested in working in prevention and things with these types of products in some way. I don't know, because it's really helped me. I feel like my nervous system's stronger. I had an insight into the fact that meds just make the nervous system weaker. They kind of dull it out and make it weaker, but they don't heal anything. And now that I don't have that in my system, my nervous system feels so much stronger. Like I can actually really deal with the moment. And if stuff arises from the past, I can see it's from the past. It seems to me like these nutrients really help with that problem of lack of euphoric sensation that Dr. Daniel Siegel talks about. So it's interesting. The things that I've considered before, I'm now able to say are more likely than just wondering, because I'm actually living it. And I also realized this morning that when map consciousness is initiated, consciousness is starting to direct the body and not the ego. And since we all share consciousness, it's actually partly determined by our relationship, but not by the relationship of our egos and the images in our brains, but the actual images, the actuality of reality. It's calculating based on a different algorithm, and it feels like we don't have any control of ourselves and volition because we're actually being moved and molded kind of like chess pieces. If one piece moves, that limits the next moves of the next player. So the space becomes more important, the relationship, and not the mechanism that divides up the space, which is the ego. So usually we have our ego that's dividing up the space and we act based on that. But when we're really in relationship, it's more directed by one's level of consciousness. So one's level of consciousness will create how the other person responds. Not exactly, we can't predict what it will be, but it will change what is possible and what's probable to a different set of quantum phenomena. So it's also the space that one creates by their beingness and the way they hold themselves and what they're doing. So if I crouch down on the street and start crying in a level of fear or something, people are going to respond to me differently than if I'm standing tall and expressing myself in a certain way. And lately I've been having some good insights right before I fall asleep, and then I'm too tired and lazy to get up and write them down, and I just drift off and forget about it. But it's okay, because it's infinite. I'll talk a little bit about the superhuman thing because it was really cool. And one of the things that Ken Wilber mentioned is that when we pursue our own particular lines of development, new capacities come online. And how this really resonated with me was how I've been talking about this so much, about how I pretty much have to create in order to discover those capacities. I can't just come upon them by wishful thinking or thinking I know what those capacities are, but just by pursuing these lines of development, different capacities come online, like the capacity to talk to myself for hours upon end, or now wondering what gifts I need to awaken within myself now that my nervous system is clear. So it's not something that we can even know what that is. We just have to go step by step. And I've been saying that one has to actually create oneself. So in a way, he's saying that. And I feel like mania is turning on the superhuman operating system. And this point is really missed because it turns on and the whole structure that one has to hold oneself together breaks down. And it takes a while for that to come online and us to learn those capacities that are much more powerful than the old capacities that we had. And the brain becomes so much more powerful that we can get those old capacities back, but it's trying to leave room for the new capacities to come online first until those old capacities come online and actually just take up all the brain space again. So the trouble is we don't have that space to heal and transform and discover our gifts. And again, it's a misunderstanding, it's a misperception of what's actually happening. We're trying to bandage up something that we think is so valuable in this me structure, this ego structure. But these other capacities will have a different operating system, and Ken Wilber calls it the superhuman operating system, and I would have to agree with that. And he says we have superhuman capacities, and that we have to awaken these capacities in our own being. And I think map consciousness awakens it, but we have to create from those capacities. And we try and we fail. But it seems that maybe there's certain lines of development or intelligence that Ken Wilber talks about that are underdeveloped. So when that superhuman creativity and capacity to create oneself comes online, then a lot of times we eventually burn out. And so we must awaken these in ourselves. They become awakened, but we need to create them. I might go more into the superhuman stuff later, but I wanted to say that one thing I realize is totally underdeveloped in me is business. And I was actually thinking maybe going back to school to take some business courses, because there's a lot I want to share, and I actually think of business as a way to share. And I don't have those skills, so maybe I can develop them or just have some sort of business help at some point. But I actually had more realizations about a business I might want to create, so I'll talk about it because I've done that before, but there was some more concrete ideas flowing through me. So maybe by talking about the superhuman stuff and this business stuff and integrating into home stuff, that will help with moving into what I want to create. And if I'm able to do that too, then it might be able to help other people who are creating themselves as superhumans also have some kind of business structure, so when they are getting connected with what they want to share, they can actually share it in a certain way. And I also thought of business as the language that we all understand. Everyone understands what a business is and what exchanging value is in terms of a business. But if somebody connects with this high energy and feels very creative and they just want to share, but there's no actual structure that's understandable, then it makes it very difficult to share. So that's another reason why I was thinking about that. And I forgot to mention about this downloading phase that I seem to be in again. I'm hoping that the micronutrients will help support not short-circuiting my brain. And it does feel more calm and it does feel more embodied to just write down insights and not feel in such a hurry to speak about them. So much for putting things in order. Last night I went to see Wonder Woman, and it was pretty good. I wouldn't say it's my favorite movie, but it was entertaining. The previews weren't entertaining and the commercials beforehand weren't entertaining, but the movie was entertaining enough. And after the movie, I was walking through the parking lot and two men were playing and singing the song Fast Car by Tracy Chapman. And that's interesting because one of the only songs I've been listening to on YouTube lately is a remix of that song by Jonas Blue. And the YouTube video actually has two women dancing together in just this nice and happy way. So it makes me happy to watch that video and see different kinds of love expressed in different ways without just making them overtly sexual, but just kind of happy and fun. And I like that video. It's awesome. So it was sort of magical for the first song I really hear people playing out in the open public space to be that song. And if I was smart, I would have taken a video for at least a few seconds, but I don't like to put other people in my videos without permission, so I just don't do that. But they were quite talented. It was a guitarist and a violinist playing, so that was kind of magical. And I did want to see the movie just because of how it's sort of a superhuman, superhumanity, superhero type movie. And today I booked my train ticket home. Yes, a train ticket, it cost me $158 instead of maybe $100 to fly, but I don't really like flying, but I might choose to fly anyway. But I just booked the ticket, so I have it. And so when I booked the ticket, I grabbed my passport, and in my passport I found this that I probably wrote like 2 months ago, and I was trying to just have this overt reminder. And it says, Superhuman embodied. Help with magic. We help with magic, not mental illness. And I guess I'm writing a note here to myself about having some sort of waiver that we help with magic, not mental illness. So there's no assumption of illness, so there's no actual liability of any kind to do with mental illness, because this isn't dealing with that at all. And I also wrote the Krishnamurti quote, "Is it possible for human beings to bring about a totally different category or dimension of the mind?" And it's interesting that he says human beings to bring it about, not just to magically happen or just some act of grace, but human beings have to bring this about. We have to invite it. We have to wonder. We have to question. We have to look. We have to see. We have to inquire. And can we learn together and build a bridge to magic? So I know in the United States they have some recovery learning communities, and that still has an implication that something was wrong. Maybe something was really right, and it appears like something's really wrong. Maybe something was wrong, and it's trying to be made right. And that's kind of the magic of all of it. So whatever it is that I do move into creating, it might have manifested by this journey through mental illness, but I never thought it was that in the first place. And if there was something like what it is I want to create, maybe I would have never had to go through that at all. But in going through that, I've learned what I've needed to learn in order to see the necessity of something else. So it's all part of it. I never say this in terms of regrets. There's nothing of the sort. But it would be lovely if people didn't have to be pathologized, didn't have to have their path pathologized in this way. So it's interesting that I wrote that down a couple months ago, and now I'm really exploring the superhuman thing with what Ken Wilber wrote. So this inquiry into superhumanity isn't a personal thing. It's something that many people wonder about. It's something that we're moving towards if we're meditating, or we're moving towards if we're doing anything to attempt to improve ourselves. And I won't go into that right now. I have other things to talk about. I have so much that I've written down, and I do actually want to talk about some things I wrote today, and then maybe get to the superhuman stuff later, as well as some of the business things that I've thought of. Just having dialogue with myself, which is unfolding my own superhumanity. And today I tried to call home and the number didn't work. And so I texted and they said, "Oh, we had to change the number because they gave us the wrong area code and number when we moved." And it's actually the number I put on my medical ID bracelet because I thought that would be the best number to get a hold of everyone in the future if there was some kind of incident or challenge that was met by pathologization. And the number on my bracelet isn't even right. And I changed it in my medical ID on my iPhone. And today I was sort of tempted to just take the bracelet off because it says that phone number, and it also says medication, 750 milligrams lithium, which is no longer true. And yeah, I just wanted to take it off, but then I didn't want to jinx it. I didn't want to feel more safe than I actually am, because I'm still in the United States, and I feel like I will just leave it on. It does say see medical ID, so it can at least refer to that, and at least if I'm wearing a phone number, I can say it's the wrong phone number, so it still invites a dialogue, but perhaps the wrong kind. And I will probably keep it on until I go home. And I will definitely take it off when I get home. So yes, just not wanting to jinx it. I told myself I would wear it the whole time. So I don't want to tell myself something else to my subconscious and get it confused. And it's sort of an epigesturetic way of telling myself that I do want to keep myself safe. I do want to live, even if it has the wrong information. It's the right gesture. And the gesture is probably more powerful than the information itself. And a friend of mine sent me a YouTube video to watch the other day, and it was actually a lady, Anna Breitenbach, and she calls herself an animal communicator and an animal whisperer. And it was actually a video of her talking on behalf of the sharks, because she was able to connect with shark consciousness and speak to them and and sort of harvest that voice and give voice to it through the human voice so we can understand sharks better. And she also talked about how when we're in the water, if we're fearful, there's sort of these quantum holographs that are released, and other animals can pick up on that, such as sharks. If we're feeling competitive or afraid, the sharks can pick up on those quantum holographs. So I just thought it was interesting that she's using the same language that I've created for myself in some of the ways that I've been able to speak, perhaps for creatures or types of people beyond myself. And I feel like I'm able to communicate that. I don't necessarily feel like I'm necessarily communicating with them, but just really perceiving that type of consciousness, because we all share consciousness, and perhaps it is in the language of quantum holographs, sort of recognizing the patterns, and the interference patterns are all there, and we can sort of shine our laser light of perception on it to really see the images and interactions that arise and how that plays out, and speak to it. It seems actually like something that I'm able to do as well. Not necessarily that I'm an animal communicator per se, but I've said the same sort of thing of saying, giving voice to Gaia, Gaia-log, speaking as Gaia, speaking as nature, speaking as. We can speak as almost anything if we're able to really perceive and see and connect with that, because if we're not connecting with our ego structure that's self-centered and focused on me, then we can see a lot more, and we can give voice to what we see, whether we're actually communicating directly with that consciousness or just really able to see and extrapolate holistic patterns and give voice to it. I'm not sure exactly, but I really was touched by her ability to just stand there confidently and say, hey, I speak with animals, I can communicate with them, I can understand them, I can ask them. And it's the same as being in dialogue or dialogue with everything, and questioning something, and then when that question is posed to oneself, the brain works in sort of this quantum holographic domain to give an impression on the clear mind screen, to be able to give voice to that which one is inquiring into. So she is conscious and curious and concerned and inquiring into animals and their lives and their beings, and she's able to ask questions to them, whether it's a them or a they, particularly somewhere. It's not, it's all of consciousness, and by asking those particular questions, she's able to communicate with that. Call it shark consciousness. I feel like we can tap into communicating with almost any consciousness, but when we have the ego going in circles, we're not even really communicating with our own consciousness. We're just communicating as programs circulating upon themselves and creating some kind of momentum and circular structure that creates this illusion of a center. I remember in Physics 12 learning about centripetal acceleration and how something accelerates around a center, and anyways, if something's accelerating and going around in circles, it sort of creates a center that's not really there per se, but it's sort of implied in that it's moving in a circle. A circle has a center, but doesn't mean there's an actual thing there. It's just maybe a point in space, but we feel that's where we're localized. But anyways, I also felt by listening to her that what she's really accomplished is something about really honing her sensitivities for a particular task, if you want to call it a task, or a particular connection. She might actually be able to connect with almost any consciousness, but she's directing her energy into having dialogue with animal species and picking up the subtle impression and giving voice to that in the human language so other people can understand. And I feel like we who go through map consciousness get in connection with this very subtle sensitivity. But we don't ever really get a chance to hone that and wonder about that and feel into where we want to direct that sensitivity and what we would like to give voice to. So maybe some people want to connect and be sensitive to a particular type of terrible experience that human beings go through and unfold and give voice to more of that. Or other people want to connect with dogs, or connect with people, or connect with certain even structural things in society. It's a sensitivity that is able to sense and perceive and put very subtle impressions into language. So the trouble is that when we go into map consciousness, we're feeling into all these different things, and it's hard to give voice to all these things. So we connect with this situation here and give voice to that, and this situation here and give voice to that. And it sounds like we've lost who we are, because we're actually giving voice to the moment, and that can change. But as we hone it over time, we can actually start to select the moments we put in front of us. So I've talked before about we sort of give voice, or we are what we put in front of us on a continual basis. So if it's really random at first, because we're just sort of going through life, when we first get connected with this kind of chaotically, it's like that on purpose, because that way we can actually discover that which we want to connect with, which maybe we had a sense of when we were children. And then we got moved away from that, and then when the ego breaks, we sort of are randomly bouncing around trying to figure it out again. So what I'm trying to say is, if she wouldn't have necessarily honed this sensitivity and honed this energy into something specific and have the confidence to give voice to that, she could have been pathologized too. I was watching her talking about the sharks say this and the sharks say that. A lot of doctors might actually think she's just a mental case. And obviously she's not. But how many people who doctors think are mental cases are obviously something a lot different than that, but they've just never been given the chance or the space or the understanding or the love to be able to figure that out for themselves. They're just given the story of being mentally defective, when maybe we need to be somewhat mentally defective to be effective in all these other dimensions of humanity that we can connect with. Not just this mental construct that we live by. We're trying to get in touch with our whole being, all of our senses, every cell in our body. And when we're in touch with that, it creates different words coming out of our mouth. And it takes a while for us to actually learn what that's trying to communicate with us. And the other day, I wrote down something that felt really powerful about how, and I won't go into it fully, but really, when we first connect with this sensitivity, we can see so much more. We're sensitive to so much more. And not even see with our physical eyes, but see with all of our senses. And all of our senses are speaking to us at the same time. And we might go around saying to people, I feel so good, I feel so great, I'm so powerful, or, even like I feel like God, or basically we're saying we're feeling things we've never felt before. We're feeling power because there's power going to all these senses that pretty much have been turned off by the mental structure that we all have for all these years. And then we might talk about, or try to talk about, or try to put into words things that we're seeing or things that we're sensing. So we might say something that seems really off to a person who's never connected with this. But to us, it's actually a perception that we're having. And it might seem out of context because we can get in touch with so much more context than the context that's created this society. So it seems off. But what I sensed was the underlying thing of it all is when we're saying things that don't make sense to other people, we're having a sense of something other people can't sense. So if we say something that doesn't make sense, it basically means I can sense something that you can't sense. Whatever it is that we say doesn't matter, but we're sensing something others can't sense. And when the other can't see it, and it's sort of like, what was that about? Then we get confirmation, oh, they can't see that. They don't see what I'm sensing, or they can't sense that. And then so we share more and more of these perceptions with people. And I'm not saying they have to be anything profound. We might just say, oh, that bird flying overhead means that it's going to rain tomorrow. And somebody might think, But we're just sensing something more. That's all it's saying. I'm sensing something more, and I'm trying to put it into words. And these might not be the right words, but I'm putting something more into words than just this structure that we always live and speak and talk and communicate by. And then the more people don't meet that, or unable to meet that, and sort of see it as strange, that sense of, I'm seeing something more. I'm seeing something beyond the ego. I'm trying to put words into something that I've never sensed before because it's been blocked. The more that happens over time, like whether it's days or months or a year, who knows how long someone can go on like that, eventually, when a certain energy or momentum of that runs out, it actually gets turned into a projection. So if I'm actually sensing something for real and it's hitting my mind screen and I'm trying to give voice to it, and nobody can see what I'm saying, at some point it flips. And it goes from, I can see more, or I can see something, and I'm trying to say it, to, I'm seeing things. Because we go through life operating based on things and objects and separate objects. And in this map conscious state, we're giving voice to the whole, to the holistic perception, and people aren't used to people speaking based on holistic perceptions. They don't understand. So then eventually, when that sort of runs out, and a person isn't being met in that space, that person doesn't give up. That process sort of gives up. It's not a personal thing. It's that the ego person has actually dissolved that this begins to happen. But when that dissolvedness is not able to be met or something, eventually it actually gets turned into something. It gets turned into, I'm seeing things. So instead of someone walking saying, I can see that the birds flying together like this means they're communicating like that, or whatever it is, especially with so-called bipolar, we get in connection with a lot of words and perceptions, and we're just, to me, trying to make sense of this new language orientation. It's sort of a language orientation. We talk about gender orientations or sexual orientations. There's language orientations, the way we process language, whether it's subject, object, verb, or everything's a verb, or it's this whole and it's this quantum language. So we're trying to learn that. But when that learning sort of wears itself out, because if it didn't wear itself out, it would just keep going. It has to be somewhat in a dialogue, otherwise it just fizzles out. The energy of it fizzles out, because the energy is based on sharing perceptions together in dialogue and seeing together, not competing with each other's thoughts and opinions. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is when that energy seems to fizzle out, the process gets reversed to the ego, personal thing, and when it's back to the ego again, the ego is speaking as, I'm seeing something. And when it decides that I'm seeing something, which could actually be when the ego decides to make this about itself and the image-making structure that the ego is, and the ego is able to keep that structure limited within the head, but when it's actually holistic perceptions mixed in with the ego taking ownership of that, it will actually project something beyond the skull. And then when that happens, a person goes to someone and says, I'm seeing things. Or they might not directly say that, but over time it becomes obvious that they're seeing things that aren't there to the other. But the thing is that when the process began and it was magical and beautiful, and that person became sensitive because the ego structure was scrambled, they were also seeing things that aren't there. But they're there, they're everywhere for everyone to see, but it's pretty much the other can't see what the person who has become sensitive can see. And when it's met with disbelief by the other, and it's not even about believing it, but moving into a space of dialogue and seeing together. When it's not met with that dialogue and unconditional love, then this, I'm seeing something, or have new senses of something, or I'm feeling something more, and I'm trying to put it into words, and I don't know how. But when I say something, it's just an indication that I'm seeing something more beyond the ego. And then ego structures come in and sort of stamp that out over time. And then it gets flipped. And a person will then be saying, I'm seeing things that aren't there. So it could be, I'm seeing love is everywhere, or I'm feeling love is everywhere, to when that fizzles out, I'm seeing things that aren't there. So instead of, in the beginning of it, meeting with people who might be more in an egoic structure way of relating, meeting that in dialogue and wondering what that's all about, and creating this shared space of inquiring about what this means to see more beyond the ego, and seeing that when somebody's saying things that seem kind of out there, it's an indication they're seeing more, and wondering about that instead of being afraid of it. And then eventually, as the process moves along and gets transformed by the dominant paradigm and the dominant way of relating to that, subtly and in gestures, the person eventually gets flipped into, I'm seeing things that aren't there, and actually seeing things that aren't there. But it's projecting it from consciousness because the whole wasn't able to be communicated and shared to change the seeing of others ever so slightly. So that process seems pretty reasonable to me. And then, since one wasn't able to communicate initially, I'm feeling more, I'm seeing more, can you see it too? Like, let's talk about this or whatever. Eventually it gets changed into, somebody's in a doctor's office saying, I'm seeing things. And then people listen because they're ready to just hand over a pill and treat them like mental patients for the rest of their life, when they were seeing more. They're seers, they're visionaries. There's something else going on. There's this visionary aspect that is bringing in some kind of new consciousness and new ways of perceiving. But these new ways of perceiving are medicalized eventually when one can't perceive. So when one can no longer give voice to these perceptions, it sort of fizzles out. And it's not something we can control. It's an energy that runs its course. And unfortunately, it runs many people into many courses of medications. And I can really see how it might not be necessary if there's dialogue about this. Not just, oh, we have the answer, you have a mental illness. And dialogue from the beginning, a new understanding from the beginning, not waiting till the energy fizzles out and then somebody's actually seeing projections from consciousness because one was not able to complete the voice reversal process of speaking as what one sees and perceives in the moment and sharing that with another. We're always speaking about our past and our story and all of this thing. And we think if somebody's saying something other than that, then they're just strange. But I think it's strange to just talk about our stories and things. This video is getting a little long, and I'll perhaps go into that more later. And I wonder if I was able to unfold that reversal of seeing all this information and not being able to translate it into something shareable, and how eventually, when it gets translated back into the ego projects images, and in order to share and be connected to people, one just says, basically, I'm having these symptoms. And it doesn't generally happen that way where somebody just goes to a doctor and says, I'm having these symptoms. It's usually people are sort of engaged in a dialogue about their symptoms, but not about their original perceptions, because it's left until the point where one is sort of moving back down from that level of perception back into this ego level of perception. And when one is integrating back into the ego again, the ego can actually project. It can project, I was seeing things, or I'm seeing things, because we were seeing things before, but they were difficult to put into words. But we weren't seeing things that weren't there. We're just able to give voice to things that are so subtle because we're very sensitive. Yeah. I have so much to talk about, but I'll just make one more video today and just edit them tomorrow. And I didn't mention that tonight will be the first night that I take half a Benadryl. The last 4 nights I took 3/4, and tonight I'll take half for 4 days and then 1/4. And hopefully I can sleep just fine. And after I finished the last video, I was thinking about how, in a way, all of the perceptions we talk about when we're in map consciousness and we share with people is an attempt to ask, do you see what I see? So if I'm sharing something about the relationships of a bird with a particular tree or something that I feel I can see and understand, these subtle perceptions, and I share it with somebody, it's like saying, can you see what I see? And generally over time, it seems like people can't see what we see. And eventually it turns into a hallucination. That question, can you see what I see, turns into a question from the ego perspective, which is deemed a hallucination. So whenever somebody shares that they're seeing something that's not there, maybe at first they don't even know it's not there until somebody says, that's not there. Like if I say, oh, I see Elvis in the corner of the room, somebody would say, I don't see what you see. But when it's more obvious, when it's turned into that later, after these subtle perceptions have not been able to be shared and met and had dialogue about, the ego projects and hallucinates. It's always doing that anyways. All of our so-called normal thoughts are just projections of our ego. But when they're within a certain so-called normal range, then it's okay. But as soon as we're actually seeing something that's not there, and it's really obvious because somebody else is able to really confirm it, or maybe we're able to confirm it ourselves because we know that Elvis is no longer living, then we might be really feeling, wow, I'm hallucinating, I'm seeing things that aren't there. But we're all seeing things that aren't there all the time. They're not things. They're subtle energies, and we can give voice to them. But I feel like when those subtle energies, when we're not able to learn that language and give voice to them, those subtle energies turn into ego energy. Because we're not giving voice to them, so they're turned into more ego voice and ego energy. And the ego is words and image making. So it's either going to be turned into more words or more image making. So if we can actually turn it into words in this other way that is not in reference to the ego, it's not going to add fuel to the ego to a point where it starts projecting more images, which could just be telling us, hey, you can see things that aren't there. You can see things that are everywhere, that are subtle patterns, subtle energies. And if you can give voice to them, you're not going to be projecting things from your ego and saying, I'm seeing something that's not there. It gets turned into, I can only say, hey, I'm seeing something that's not there, when I'm not able to connect with all these subtle energies and the infinite words that it's going to create otherwise if we're able to connect with that subtle energy. So I'm seeing what I'm saying as I'm saying it, but who knows if anyone ever will get what I'm saying. But I feel that's one of the ways that I've been able to talk to myself so much is I'm seeing subtle energies, I'm seeing patterns, I'm seeing interference patterns, I'm seeing into the quantum hologram. But if I was to ignore that, and that energy's still there, it's got to be translated into something, and it's going to be translated into more body tissue because I'm using medications to mediate it, or it's going to be translated into more thoughts about myself and scariness, because that energy could be scary if we're not able to actually really connect it with it. And if we feel like this energy is a harmful process, then it's going to seem that way. Because in a way, it is harming our ego structure, and that structure is something we rely on to stay functioning in society. So we value functioning, but we don't necessarily value these new functions that are coming online and that we can actually invite to come online by participating with this energy. So I feel that bit is really important, and the last video is important too, to actually see the mechanism that is turning this energy into something that seems to onlookers like a mental illness. But if we can master it, then maybe that will never happen. And these are ifs, because I went through a long journey in the mental health system to get to this point, to be able to talk about it with myself in this way. So I will never know if it can just be move through without the mental health paradigm because I didn't have the opportunity to do that. But perhaps other people one day might. And that's one of the big reasons why I talk to myself. And also, I want to have people to talk about this stuff and whatever, infinite energies and subtleties with, not just personal stories and things. We're so enamored by that, and then we have to hear more and more of it in entertainment, and it just goes on and on and on. And one day we'll just be born with a chair tied to our ass. And I came across an email or an article about how Elon Musk wrote this email to his employees because the safety rate at the Tesla plants is actually 30% lower than the average in industry or something like that. I don't have all the details perfect, but I never look at the details. I just look at the pattern, and then I'm able to talk to myself about it for quite a period of time. And he mentioned that he is actually interested in learning the tasks that his employees are getting injured by doing. So I found that really fascinating because I've talked before about embodied empathy and how I've felt at times like a homeless person on the street, and how I feel that informs something in me moving forward. So I feel like that so-called dissociation is actually embodied empathy. And what Elon Musk is doing is sort of embodied empathy, but it goes beyond because he's actually wanting to take action to really embody the empathy by learning the task that is leading to him needing to feel empathetic towards that situation. And out of that, I created a new word called Empath Action. So it's a combination of empathy and action. So it's one thing to actually feel empathetic towards a person, like really feeling their pain, but it's another thing to actually take empath action, to take action based on that empathy. So me feeling like a homeless person on the street is embodied empathy, but it's not really empath action. And I feel like that experience shows me, for one, we're one consciousness, we're not separate, so I can experience anything that any human being can, and I don't have to be that person because it's in consciousness, and that pattern could be entrained or connected with through the morphogenetic field, and I could actually act out being that way, like crouching on the street and freezing cold. And it's actually trying to show me, hey, people are suffering, get out there and do something. And I do things, but I feel like there's some kind of empath action that comes out of that, which is doing something to help a homeless person. So it's one thing to feel the empathy, but doing something is another. So I take Elon Musk's gesture of wanting to learn those jobs as empath action. It's not just empathy. So I was grateful for making that word up based on what I read. And the other thing I thought about in terms of how there's a 30% higher injury rate is that it could be a good sign in a way. It means people are really trying. It means they're willing to put in their best effort for that company. They're really stretching themselves. They're really doing something. So having a 30% higher injury rate could just be a sign of everyone trying to do great things for a great company. It doesn't mean that that shouldn't be minimized and looked at. I'm just saying that there's probably 30% higher injury rate in people who run to train for Ironmans than people who just run for leisure. So maybe in some companies people are just working for leisure and just going through the motions, but maybe at Tesla they're really trying to do something. And that's a strange way to look at it, but I look at most things in strange ways. And there was a line in the email that was really profound. He said, "I will go down to the production line and perform the same task." And my mind extrapolated to my experience, which has nothing to do with the particulars of what he's saying, going to the production line of a Tesla plant, but extrapolating it to my context, I realized I've been to and through the production line of creating mental patients. I've played many roles. I played psych ward patient, I played community mental health patient, I've played peer support worker, I've played advocate, I've played sharer of my story, I've played so many roles. And just as he wants to learn the tasks on the production line in order to learn more about them to minimize injury to others in the future, that's sort of what I would like to do. I've been to the production lines, and now I want to light the way out. And not that everybody wants to get out, but yeah, it just felt like that was a cool extrapolation transformation. Transforming what he said into, I've done that. I've been to the production lines, and maybe I can see some things that might help produce better lives for people, and not necessarily in opposition of the system. Sometimes it takes somebody who can see things differently. So if Elon is able to learn the tasks and say, oh, I can see that this isn't working very well, let's change it to this so people won't get hurt. That's all I want to help with. That's all I want to do, is change things a bit so people won't get hurt. Because people are getting hurt in this system that is supposed to help people. So if Elon was trying to build all these amazing cars, but people are getting too hurt, then at some point he might say, well, I shouldn't really be building these cars if it can't be done in a way that's not going to hurt people. And the system is designed to help, but it also hurts a lot. And I would say the injury rate through the system is probably near 100%. And numerous injuries, not just one on one occasion and then it gets healed and things get better and injury never happens again. 100% of people probably get injured through the system hundreds of times. And if you take that out to the industry, if you said everyone that goes through this system gets injured hundreds of times, it would be completely not profitable, but in this industry of psychology, injuring people actually creates more profits. And I've learned a lot about what injures us in the mental health system and keeps us in it and keeps us limited. And there's a lot of psychological injury going on, which is injuring the relationship. And the way we're received from day one injures the relationship. And I sort of wonder how I can strengthen my relationships with psychiatrists. And I just wrote this down today because I kind of want to just sever them. But when we work out, when we lift weights, we actually injure our muscles, but we don't sever them. We injure them. But that injury, that damage actually creates the muscles to heal stronger. So can I challenge them in some way? And I was thinking when I go back home, just never going back to a psychiatrist, but then I was thinking, what if I went back and just shared with them what happened here in California? I kind of fear it a little bit just because even going back into like an office could be somewhat re-traumatizing. Maybe I could ask to have a meeting out in the community and saying, I want to meet with you, but you have to meet me in the community. We'll see. Or I could even say, yeah, I still have this, but I'm supporting it in a completely different way. I'm supporting it with nutrition, and my nervous system feels a lot stronger. So I haven't decided about that, but I might actually go back and share with my psychiatrist, who I haven't seen in probably 5 months. And also that 10-minute time I have at that festival, I might actually find a creative way to share my story instead of doing that comedy. I'm pretty much set on not doing that comedy, but find some kind of creative way to share this or share something, I don't know. And in the article about Elon Musk's email, they were saying, oh, it's a lesson in emotional intelligence. And I feel like map consciousness is actually a lesson in emotional and relational intelligence, which is really underdeveloped in us. But when the ego gets scrambled, we have an opportunity to learn that language. It's a completely different language. It's not the language of rationality and reason, but it can actually become more rational over time. Just like over time, through human development and existence, the intellect has become more and more rational. And perhaps emotional and relational intelligence can actually become more rational. So right now we see it as really irrational, but perhaps there hasn't been any energy put towards bringing rationality into that somehow. And I have no idea what that looks like. It's probably just still in its infancy. And I actually feel like so-called mental illness is actually just a relational illness. We're not relating to each other, and we're just relating based on these separative egos. And then when someone gets connected to something beyond that, people that relate based on the ego see it as odd and then try to fit them back into the ego category with these chemical medication band-aids. How can somebody who operates based on the ego see the gifts or even see that someone is seeing beyond the ego consciousness when they've never been able to touch that themselves? So it's more about being limited by the dominant paradigm. If this other way of seeing had more energy and more people were able to communicate in different ways, then maybe just the ego way of communication would be well, it just wouldn't be the only way of communicating. People might actually understand, okay, right now I'm communicating from my emotions, right now I'm communicating from the ego, right now from intellect, right now from relationality, right now from empathy, right now from... They're all different colors of the rainbow of our expressions, but we all translate it into this ego language and attribute it to some kind of perceptual center that isn't there. So, yeah, and maybe sometimes we'd be like, I'm just speaking on behalf of the lizards right now. I was looking at them and I noticed this. Or they sort of whispered this to me by just observing them. And it's the same thing with science. They observe certain things and they put language to it. But there's a science of actually clear perception in the moment that doesn't require a scientific language. Perhaps it's a Gaientific language. And if we're able to connect more with that, there'll be this richness of communication. It seems like this is all a miscommunication. We're not able to communicate. We're missing communication. We're missing communicating about subtle energies that we're able to perceive and give voice to. So it's a relational miscommunication. I don't want to use the word illness. It's a relational miscommunication. And it's also just only relating to each other based on our egos. And that's one way to do it, but not all the ways and every way and the only way. So, and to me, it resonates with how a lot of people start losing their ego structure and things like Alzheimer's and dementia and different neurodegenerative diseases of the brain, but it's because we're not generating all these other faculties that we have, and that ego structure is just so frail. It's really frail, and we don't have these other ways of communicating and perceiving to buffer that. It's not that the ego's bad. It just sort of becomes bad when it's the only way that we're able to communicate, and then we get bored, and then we get restless, and then we get... because it's not the only way. It's not the only thing the brain is capable of. So can we improve our listening space? Can we listen from different areas of the brain? Listen from the ego, but also listen from this place beyond it that is recognizing that somebody's not talking just about themselves and their ego, or the structures of society and business and all these things that are acceptable to talk about, but maybe opening this area of the brain that might be receptive to talking about subtle perceptions and refining our perception and not just projecting our opinions onto everything. I'm sure they can make some really good computers that can argue about opinions all day long and debate based on a stored memory bank of all of human history. Is that what life's about? And can we apply epi-listening ethics? So I have epi-gesture ethics, but I created epi-listening ethics, and I don't know if that's the word I'll keep, but it's something about if we're able to listen from the spaciousness and listen for subtle perceptions and meaning beyond what one is saying. What are the gestures that happen from accurate listening? Not listening through one's opinions being projected onto what the other person's saying and not really listening. And we already do this in a way. If somebody says, "Oh, I wish I had a coffee," they might actually be saying, "Can you get me a coffee? I don't want to get up," or "I can't get up right now," or something. So we already, by listening to the meaning beyond what somebody's really saying, if I listen to, "Oh, I wish I had a coffee," I might just walk over and grab that person a coffee. Or I might be like, they can get their own coffee and just walk off. So are we able to do this on a more subtle level? Are we able to understand when maybe somebody's sharing a subtle perception and be open to it, and sort of in those moments at least drop our opinions and wonder, how did they see that? How did they come up with that? And that might be a question for somebody in a state of map consciousness when somebody's trying to understand, how did you come up with that? How did that arise in your mind? Not, "Oh, that's something was wrong with them." There is no them there. Where's this them? Where's this ego? There's no person. It's, how did this arise in consciousness? And when somebody's speaking about their past or their childhood or what happened yesterday, or, something they learned in school or what they had for breakfast, there's never a question, how did they come up with that? It's from memory. But when somebody's saying something that obviously isn't coming from their memory, then we think they're strange, because everything should just be regurgitated out of memory. It shouldn't actually come from being in connection with this moment. And so actually wondering, how did this person arise with this, or these words, or whatever it is? But we don't wonder about that because we're so fixated by memory. So we're just living in our memories. And when somebody is living in something that seems like it's not memory, then something has got to be wrong. But when we rely so much on memories and then those break down later in life and there's nothing else there, then we're just kind of a vegetable. But we don't have to let our brain deteriorate in this way, because it's not meant to just be regurgitating memories all the time. So we need to move towards inviting these types of sharings out in each other, not just being comfortable when somebody's sharing something that they obviously read in the headlines this morning. That's just so easy. Then we're comfortable, then we feel safe and secure because somebody is reading us the headlines each day. What about when people are trying to go live with things that are living now? That makes us afraid? If we just start and earlier as we multiply, and as technology uses us instead of utilizing it for a creative tool of sharing. So the ego is just a really bad program that we've all inherited for interacting with each other. And to me, map consciousness is the map out of the ego. It's moving in a different dimension to map a different way to operate that's not based on the ego. But the trouble is the ego needs to be suspended in order to move in that map and actually map that territory by living in it. And when we first are in it, there are no rules. We don't have any rules established into how map consciousness operates through us and as us. And the ego isn't a thing that's ours, so we become free to make new maps. But there are certain limitations, and when we bump up against those limitations, that's when it becomes obvious to others that we're mapping something else, and they are uncomfortable because the rules we're creating are sometimes in opposition to the rules they operate by. And I'm not saying there's any right or wrong here, but it's just really interesting. And I think I was talking a little bit about the context I've created up to the point of moving myself out of the mental illness paradigm was really just stepping stones of context. And now I don't want to just create stepping stones of context. I want to create a context of paradise. So the stepping stones were just to get out of that prison. It's sort of like using the prison wall to build a bridge to freedom, to build a bridge out of the prison. And in that way, that context becomes obsolete. So maybe if people listen, it might provide some kind of stepping stone, but it's not it. It's just moving context forward to move further and further away from the context we were indoctrinated into when we were given a label. At some point, it sort of shrinks in its percentage of value and usefulness as one is able to continue to build new context. And one has to build one's own for oneself. That's sort of the point of this. And drop things as one goes along for oneself when it's time. If we build context for ourselves, we don't have to rely on the mental health languaging and context. It's sort of an ultimate safety net that creates a lot of problems with the way it helps, but it does create an overall somewhat helpful framework for a given amount of time. So one thing that was interesting about listening to the Ken Wilber podcast was that he said that people of integral consciousness, and that's his language, are able to recognize the value, or that there is value in everything of all the different levels and lines of development. And I sort of realized in that moment that this mental health paradigm is just a line of development that can be developed further. So the different stages of development of the paradigm have been somewhat helpful to some people over time, but it still needs to continue to develop. And somebody might start off in the psych ward and they're able to one day go on to be playing a role in the world that they exactly wanted as a child, or as they unfolded their life moving through that paradigm, and transcend it. My big qualm with it is that it traps people within the paradigm. If it offered 5 to 10 paths out of it, there's no real problem. But when it's limiting people, then there is a problem. And when it's harming people because of the way it's limiting people, partly because people who go through this a lot of times, I feel, are really connecting with their unlimited nature. So to be limited is going against the nature of the unfolding of the process. It's like saying, no, you're not unlimited. Here, take this and you'll feel better. No, you're not superhuman. No, you're not connecting with your gifts. No, you don't have subtle perceptions that could be rich for yourself and for maybe other people too. And I feel we can see a lot more than ourselves, than our ego structure, and through our ego structure. And we're learning to give voice to that. Just like the animal whisperer lady learned to give voice to these subtle perceptions she was having. I'm sure she didn't wake up one day and say, oh, the sharks are communicating with me. That's what it is. She probably went through being, we're speaking. And who is that speaking? What is that speaking? You know, and people who are having subtle perceptions initially, maybe when they're not able to really connect with that energy and what is it exactly, it just eventually gets turned into and consolidated into, oh, I hear voices. Maybe that is just a very succinct way of saying, I'm connecting with subtle energies that are speaking things through me, like the sharks or the people homeless on the street, or the fish, or some type of animal, or all of it. Whatever's there in the moment. That animal lady, she puts these animals in front of her, and she's putting that in front of her in the moment. But if we don't go on a path of putting something particular in front of us in the moment to speak as, to have spoken through us, then it could actually be anything. And then if we're not able to understand, we're speaking as anything, we're speaking as the moment, we're speaking as the energy of the moment, then as time goes on and we're not able to understand that there is no ego, there is no person there, but it's what the moment gives voice to. If there's a resistance to that, or all of the energy that's put into all these campaigns about don't stigmatize this, everybody has a fear of these different types of perceptions. If there's no way to understand that, eventually, again, it gets consolidated in the same way that I'm seeing something beyond, I'm trying to give voice to it, gets turned into I'm seeing something, and now I'm voicing that I'm seeing something to a psychiatrist, and then they medicate me. The same thing could be true of hearing voices. We're hearing voices. We're hearing the voices of the moment. If I look at a lamp, I can understand the language of the lamp and maybe understand what went into putting it together, and I could speak to that, which is a language that was created in order for that lamp to come into being. And so I'm actually speaking for the lamp in a way. I'm speaking as the process of the lamp. But we always feel like we have to be speaking about this ego self and our memories. But when we get bored of that, frankly, anything else can speak through us. But if we don't really understand that, and understand we can speak as any subtle perception in the moment, and we don't speak them, or we don't share them, or we don't at least understand them in some way, then as those bits accumulate over time, like I didn't speak this subtle perception, I didn't speak this one, I didn't speak this one, and they accumulate over time, eventually it's a very, very clear voice or perception of just hearing voices. And maybe it's a matter of just learning what is trying to speak through us, and we just feel, and we just think in this society that just speaking the ego through us, we all have our own little private mixture, as David Bohm says, of these sound bites that we call me, but they're very similar. And then we just want to interact based on that. Well, when that breaks down, there's something else. We're still going to speak words. We're still going to be communicating in some way. It's just of a different quality. But we don't necessarily understand that. We've never been taught that. And so if that isn't merged with, or we're not in touch with that, then that sort of accumulates in our nervous system over time, and eventually the nervous system projects that we hear voices because we're not connecting with these other energies that produce sound through us, because we can speak as almost anything as human beings. Just like the language of science. So in science, molecules can't speak, or some kind of process in physiology can't speak, but through the creation of the scientific language and the scientific inquiry and understanding, a scientist can write a paper and give voice to some of these processes. We wouldn't necessarily think, oh, the scientist is speaking the language of the molecules, or the scientist is speaking for the molecules. But in a way, they are. But we can do this with our own eyes without this structure of science. We're all scientists. We can all inquire into things and look and wonder. This is what we did as kids. We were all scientists as kids. So scientists speak an unspoken language. The language of how molecules interact. They put that into words. But we are all scientists. The biological pathway can't speak, but it can be communicated through investigation. And a bird can't speak to us, but by investigating the bird, we can speak as that bird in a way, because we can speak about our understanding of the bird. But we never try and understand the bird, because we just say, oh, that's a robin. So they say the bird is the word, but the word actually prevents us actually understanding the bird. So we've cultivated this scientific mind, and only a very small percentage of people become scientists, and we just rely on them to tell us what to think and do and eat and everything. But we can actually look with our own eyes, and I feel like part of map consciousness is this new mind flowering. It's a scientific mind. It's a mind that allows us to just look at something and understand. And that's what happens in map consciousness. And we look and we have some understanding of some sort. It's like a hypothesis. We're speaking our hypotheses. We're speaking, we see with our hypothesize. Our eyes become hypothesizing eyes and not opinionated eyes. So somebody in map consciousness is actually speaking in hypotheses. So, people speak in poetry, people speak in science, people speak in different types of languages, but there's this other language coming online which is hypothesizing based on direct observation. But we're so afraid to be right and wrong, and we don't share these things. And we don't see them because we blocked ourselves from seeing them, because we're just like, oh, somebody told me this type of bird is this, and that's what it is. And oh, I know something. Congratulations. A bunch of my brain cells just died because I'm not actually investigating. I'm just knowing things and not investigating the whole pattern, how everything interacts. We're so worried about being right that we can't hypothesize and speak this language of scientific hypotheses. And the thing is, if more of us could do this, it would be a lot faster than science, for sure. So this animal lady, Anna Breitenbach, she has a gift. She's honed it by learning that language. So we need to learn the language of speaking the moment, which is scientific hypotheses, and have hypothesize. Right now we just have eyes that project, but not eyes that hypothesize. We leave that to the scientists, and then we just project our egos onto everything and think that we know something. And that's what's speaking to us and through us when the whole share that language. So it will put people into map consciousness to map out this new language. So how many of us who have been labeled can do something like Anna Breitenbach in our own unique way? Who do we want to talk to? Who do we want to talk as? What energy, what creature, what animal, what process do we want to investigate and give voice to? Maybe that's part of the initial part is very chaotic, but we can hone that. We can feel into what we want to give voice to. And even myself, I have a tendency to maybe want to give voice to some of these things related to mental illness, and I've talked to myself about, I don't want to keep doing that forever. I don't know, maybe I will here and there, but there's a lot more out there than that. It's really learning how to see. And I remember giving a friend a shirt one time that says, it doesn't matter how you look, it's how you see. And that's very, very profoundly true. And I talk about dialogue, maybe being in dialogue with Gaia. Eventually we'll find out what in particular we want to put in front of us and speak as, because we're going to speak as what's in front of us. If there's psychiatrists in front of us all the time, we're going to speak the language of being a mental patient. So putting some of these other energies in front of us could be a way to move beyond it. And I feel sometimes like I speak as Gaia, I speak as the moment. Gaia speaks to me, speaks through me. I can look at something and feel like I have some level of understanding about something. And maybe it's not true, but it's a heck of a lot more interesting than just saying, oh look, a hummingbird. That's nice. It's so much more rich. So maybe one day I'll just refine which areas of Gaia, of the infinity of the cosmos, I'm in dialogue with. And that lady who has the gift of speaking with animals, she speaks shark. She speaks maybe every animal language if she observes long enough. So maybe at first it was a bit more challenging to understand that, but now she's likely able to connect with that very easily and quickly. So maybe it's not even a matter of choosing, it's just being able to speak in this dialogical way and not gynecological. So that way we can give voice to almost anything. And then also hone our voice into moving through the moments that we want to speak as. I don't want to move through all my moments as speaking as a mental patient. We can give voice to the voiceless instead of hearing voices. It becomes so acute, and not acute as in acute illness, but just acutely obvious, like a voice that we're hearing when we've lost our connection to the subtle because nobody was speaking that language with us, and we were afraid of our own power to see and give voice to something else other than what I watched on TV last night. If we're able to speak in this way, we wouldn't need so much of that TV. And much of what I just said, I just made up by making a note to type something about that video that I watched of Anna Breitenbach. And these insights that seem more beyond the me, like as insights get more and more beyond the me, they can actually be scary. Like seeing that much can be scary. But I feel like over time, they become more strengthened in the nervous system, and the nervous system doesn't get scared. It's sort of like if I see something, not literally, but have a subtle perception of something that is 10 steps beyond the ego, it's actually going to scare the ego, and the nervous system will have a fear response. Not even necessarily because that perception was fearful, but it's just so much further away from the ego, and the ego is trying to reassert itself to sort of bring consciousness back into the usual perceptual mode that is accepted as functioning in society. So that fear is partly intelligent because it's saying, don't go too much further perceiving, because the way you'll be received if you continue to see further and further beyond yourself, it might render you non-functional and blah, blah, blah. So over time, though, I feel like the nervous system gets more used to seeing beyond itself and doesn't have to scare consciousness back into the limited self in order for the limited self to come back online, because it's definitely necessary for some level of functioning. And the trouble is, too, we're so in this limited self and this level of functioning that when it breaks down, everything's so foreign because we haven't diversified our ways of perceiving and operating in reality. If we had 10 modes, not just ego, then if the ego broke down, we wouldn't even really notice. But right now we do really notice when it scrambles because of how it's always there. But the more it gets diversified, it can arise just like some kind of seemingly profound perception. If the ego's there, it's there. If there's a profound perception, it's there. But the nervous system can try to run away into profound perceptions because it does feel somewhat novel. It feels novel, just like watching a movie we've never seen, or then wanting to see the next episode or the next sequel or something because we want to see what's next. So perception in a way works a little bit like that. It builds. It's like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And it goes stepwise outward from the ego and filling in all this context of being able to non-locally perceive, not perceive just through the locality of this centralized ego, but extend one's consciousness into being empathetic and moving into other beings and understanding them. And that's the thing too with this dialogical language. This dialogical language, it's more realizing we're consciousness, and if we're in that space of consciousness speaks through us in that we're connected to all of consciousness, all sentient beings. We as humans can speak words, so we can speak words on behalf of the consciousness of any sentient creature, for sure. Even when we look at somebody and they're like this, and we look at them, I might say, I can see that you're sad. So we already do this, but we do it in the realm of ego, and that's okay. If I say, oh, I see that you're sad, but if I say, I see that that bird is communicating to that one over there, and after they call to each other, they make this other call, and then they do this little celebration dance, people be like, why do you even care about that? Like, why don't we just go shoot those birds and eat them? I don't know. But that's, again, just applying everything to how it benefits us in our ego hunger. But it's a hunger that can never be satiated. It can only be satiated by diversifying our consciousness portfolio. We're so interested in diversifying our financial portfolio or whatever, our resume, but we don't understand that we can diversify our consciousness portfolio, our perceptual portfolio, not just having perceptions of deception, which are opinions. And the thing, when one first gets connected with insight in map consciousness, in seeing subtle perceptions and giving voice to them, they're few and far between. So when one happens, it feels really profound, and then the nervous system gets a bit scared. But as they are more awakened, the nervous system doesn't get scared by that anymore. So to me, it's just the nervous system getting used to speaking insights and operating, perceiving consciousness, not just the content of one's ego, but all of consciousness, which includes the whole cosmos.